Hey, Comic-Con.com. I am your friendly neighborhood Tom Smithyman reporter from Comic-Con.com, and we have the pleasure of having the Death Drop Drag Assassin creative team with us today, David Hazan, Alex Moore. Welcome to Comic-Con, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're super excited to have you on. Now, David, you are typically in Australia, but you are both in the UK today, right?
Yeah, for like a special appearance.
Yes, for once someone doesn't have to be up at like 2 a.m. or some ungodly hour to be here, but which we do anyway, happily, because it's always a pleasure to do
It's
these
mostly
things.
You do that because
That's true. Because
that's
I'm crazy.
Yeah. Time.
Yes.
But David, do I understand you were in? You were both at Thought Bubble?
Yeah, we were both at Thought Bubble. Alex was tabling. I was the cheer squad. So
couldn't have done it without you.
Me coming to your table and saying, "Hey, do you need anything?" You're like, "I'm fine." Just like shoveling salad into your mouth with your hand. You know?
Yeah, it's a look. Probably should choose something that's like less like, I don't know, hard to swallow and so chokeable. It's anyway, but
well, it takes away the starving artist theory, right?
Well, I don't know. You have to eat a lot of salad to be full, like.
Fair enough. Well, why don't we talk? So the second issue of Death Drop Drag Assassin has come out. You can find the review on comiccon.com, by the way. But why don't you talk a little bit, both of you, from your perspective, about what the book is about and why you decided to write, a mash-up thriller that talks about melding multiple genres together into
one. I guess I'll start. So Death Drop is about an ex-hitman turned drag queen who gets drawn back into a life of violence when her community is threatened. And I just kind of thought that retired assassin trope really kind of spoke to a side of homophobia that we don't really get to see portrayed in media often, which is internalized homophobia. I think we've seen a lot of media that really talks about, the sort of like overt external pressures of homophobia. And I really wanted to talk about how those things are internalized and then kind of reflected back on queer people. And the retired assassin trope seemed like really the best place to do that. And we really find Death Drop sort of in that, where she's like really trying to live her queerest life, and yet she's always got that like specter of her assassin mentor kind of haunting her every step.
Alex, how about from your perspective?
Well, I just bring the pretty pictures. So, but I mean, that was definitely when, because David originally sent me the outline when he approached me to do the art on this, and the fact it was sort of like, oh, it's a queer story, but it's sort of like from that sort of like slightly more, I don't know, messy, tricky perspective. Because I feel as though there isn't as much space given to sort of like stories that maybe sort of like look at the more complicated aspects of like a minority identity. So I was just, yeah, that sort of like really pulled me in. And then it was sort of like, oh, wow, this is, yeah, a really fun sounding project, because you've got sort of like very sort of like dark noir, crime noir sort of like themes, and then you're throwing that in with something like drag, which is so like bright and campy, and it's sort of like, oh, how can we sort of like mash these up? So yeah, and I don't know, as it's gone on, it's just, I don't know, I think I'm probably in the same situation with the readers. It's sort of like, oh, actually, I'm really invested in these characters and whatnot. So yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting because you talked about this mashup of the genres, right? You've got thriller, you've got drag, you've got noir. David, how did you decide that all of those things would actually make a good story?
Honestly, it just all kind of coalesced in my head at the same time. I think I'd just come off watching one of the seasons of Jessica Jones, and I thought, well, what if Jessica Jones was just a drag queen, and like, what if, and John Wick was big at the time, and all of these things kind of just aligned in my head. I was like, oh, this would make like a really great sort of introspective story. So
And Alex, what about you? I mean, I can't draw to save my life, so you'll have to explain this using small words to me. But how do you? Is there what's the challenge of taking all of these different genres, mashing them together, and not making it seem like you're making fun of the characters, like you're being too campy, right? I mean, I would think with drag, there's the ability to go really, really camp if you're not careful, right?
Well, that kind of, because it is like quite a dark story. So it's sort of like, what is like, how far do we sort of like push this in terms of like, and what still works? Because it is like, I think there definitely was an action scene at one point where I was like, I'm going to do this. And David was like, that's not the tone. And so it is sort of like doing what's best for the story and yeah, it's like, you know, if you're like making a film and it's sort of like, how do we dress this? How do we like I don't know. Again, it's just finding a way to sort of like synthesize that. Yeah, because that is always like a fine line and something that I'm very aware of, like when drawing things, that it's sort of like, oh, is this like slipping into like caricature or something that's like offensive? So that is definitely like a voice at the back of my head.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
You're right. I think the other thing is like my approach to this was always aesthetically it can be as camp as whoever is drawing it needs to or wants to be, because the themes are as dark as they are. The bright and campy aesthetics for me, and I think that was kind of part of sort of my sort of, you know, spiel to you in the script, Alex, where it's like this can be, you know, as neon and like in your face as you want it to, because at the end of the day, like these are still, you know, really people beating the shit out of each other. Sorry, YouTube, and please edit that out. But you know, it does get, you know, quite dark and quite personal, and I think it seemed to me like the perfect mix of these genres where like one is taking you in sort of this like sort of bright and campy veneer, and then the other one is really plumbing the depths, and somehow it lands up at this medium that just works.
You seem to both have touched on this, but I want to explore a little bit more. I mean, you've obviously got a good working relationship. What is it like? How do you go back and forth? You know, David, you're writing a script. You deliver it. Is it a linear process, or do you bounce back and forth and say, no, this won't work. Yes, this will work. You know, David, have you thought about this for the script? What's the relationship? And then, you know, factor in the time difference between the UK and Australia.
I mean, from my perspective, I think about the layout of a page very different to the way Alex does, which is actually pretty great. I see whatever I see in my head when I put it down on the page, and then Alex does something completely different but also magical with it. So I mostly trust them. The only time I ever will give a note is when there's a story element that I think needs to be addressed, or there's a certain tonal element which I think is not quite right. But that's pretty rare, I feel, especially at, you know, the stage we're at, where we're, you know, collaborating on issue 5. So,
Alex, does that ring true to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, having that input from David is like very helpful, because it's sort of like until I think very recent. Well, yeah, like as we're doing it, I'm reading it issue by issue, so it's sort of like I might not know if there's something coming that needs to be sort of like foreshadowed, or I haven't understood the concept of how this thing's going to work for a sort of like later plot point. But yeah, and I don't know, that's always something that sort of like fascinates me with like working with writers. I'm just talking to like another writer at the moment, where they'd sort of like sent me a sort of sneak peek at this sort of like quite ambitious like layout, and I didn't realize until quite recently that sort of like people have different levels of sort of like the ability to like visualize things in their heads. Like obviously we all saw that Apple scale like doing the rounds on social media. So yeah, I never know with writers if it's sort of like a case of, I don't know, it's a concept, or I have a distinct picture of something in my head. But I think with sort of like most good collaborations, there's sort of like that space for like sort of like both people to have an input on a thing, which David very much gives me the opportunity to do. And it is very much a case of sort of like, I get a script, there's sort of like enough like direction in there for I can get like the idea of like from the writing like how to characterize the characters and sort of like what the action beats are. But I think we might be trying something a little different with some of the fight scenes in the last issue. I don't know.
That sounds like a promise and a warning. So you're going 5 issues, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. It strikes me, and I want you to tell me if I'm wrong here. It strikes me that strip away all of the apprentice versus master and the former hit person, and even some of the queer elements and everything else. And this is really a story about community. Is that fair, David?
Yeah, I think it's about community. It's a lot about the kinds of specifically queer platonic friendships that I've experienced, and I've tried to infuse that into specifically Death Drop and Mother Henny as like people in my life, and I think that there's a lot of focus on like sex and relationships in sort of queer media, but like nowhere near enough focus on like queer friendships, how we as queer people sort of have this intergenerational transfer of wisdom. And I just think those are beautiful things that I kind of really wanted to infuse into Death Drop.
Why is it important for both of you? Why is it important that we tell queer stories?
Who else is going to do it?
Yeah. And also, I think growing up and not seeing some aspect of yourself can be incredibly damaging. I don't know, because if you don't know it exists, then
representation.
You can rack up some therapy bills in the future. Let me tell you that. Yeah.
Or in the present. Who knows?
Anyway, moving on. I'm fine.
That is a whole other podcast that we don't have time for right now. But we will charge you for it later. Don't worry. All right. So let's talk about things beyond Death Drop. What David, you're obviously working on all manner of things, Nottingham and everything else. What do you have coming up?
Well, we have the trade paperback for Monomyth, which comes out December 20th. We have Tales from Nottingham, which just came out, and the first 2 volumes of Nottingham. If you haven't picked that up yet, I would be very grateful if you would. And volume 3 is coming early next year, and there will be a big old announcement from Mad Cave at some point in the next couple of weeks on that front. So look out for that.
Excellent. You don't want to break the news here, though, right?
I mean, everybody already knows that we're doing volume 3. It's more of a like formal, nod to the fact that it's coming next year and exactly when, and a little peek at the art, which Shane's, producing some pages that have been blowing my mind, and I've been sharing them with Alex because we don't have anybody else to share them with other than creators. And
I'm more than happy to take a look at them when you want, but probably not a good thing to share them.
I'm sure you'll see them. I'm sure Melissa will reach out to you at some point in the next few weeks anyway, so you don't have to worry about that.
Fair enough. Alex, what do you have coming up?
So obviously there's issue 5 of this, and I think we've got the trade paperback of Death Drop coming out next May.
But last week in May next year,
yeah. But then you won't see anything from me for a while, potentially, because I'm currently working on a YA OGN for Penguin Random House, The Count of Monte Cristo High, which is a sort of retelling of the classic story, but with like a bunch of teenagers, which is super fun. But that's not coming out until 2026. And then there's another one of those books with HarperCollins, Castles and Cholos, which is about a group of sort of like kids who were in a D&D group and are sort of brought back together and sort of like issues happening. There was a very nice press release for that said it all a lot more concisely. And in the meantime, I'm also working on an original graphic novel that I'm hoping to crowdfund the first half of at the start of next year. But that very much depends on other schedules. So
very quickly, are you also writing it?
Yeah, no, it's basically like my MA like final year project. I went completely insane and wrote a 380-page graphic novel that the whole point of it was like, let's figure out like a way to make comics quickly, and it's like the most super rendered thing ever, and it's like, what is wrong with you? But that was a very industrious year. I wouldn't recommend doing that though, but it's super fun, and I don't know, it's very nice having like a personal project because it just enthuses you about all the other stuff. I don't know. Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing all of that. We're reviewing Nottingham and Tales from Nottingham and everything else. And of course, the final 3 issues of Death Drop Drag Assassin. Our guests today have been the creative team from Death Drop, David Hazan, Alex Moore. Thank you both very much. And for those of you who are still watching, thank you for hanging in there with us. And we will see you again soon. Take care.